Yeah, so I'm Liam McDermott. I am a postdoc at the University of Connecticut Avery Point, which is like a tiny regional campus off of the Long Island Sound. Gorgeous place. Um, but my research focuses on how neurodivergent folks learn and do physics. And so I want to talk about sort of the first project that we've been doing, which is this massive literature review and some of the really cool things that have popped out of said literature review. So before we get onto that, let's talk about being neurodivergent. So neurodiversity is one of the like frameworks that we use in our research. And to define neurodiversity, we use mainly Nick Walker's definition of it's a paradigm shift away from the pathologization of cognitive difference towards the celebration of cognitive diversity. Basically, we say that everybody's brain works differently, and that is a good thing, right? That is a thing that should be celebrated. And so neurodivergent folks are people whose identities fall under this neurodivergent umbrella, which we see to the right. We see an umbrella with multiple different neurodivergent identities beneath it, such as autism, ADHD, DID, NPD, many acronyms. I myself am neurodivergent. I'm a neurodivergent researcher studying neurodiversity. And I am autistic, ADHD, and OCD. I've made the joke many times to my students that I'm just collecting acronyms at this point. But uh, so one of the cool things that came out of my dissertation work was that every single person that I interviewed to talk about how neurodivergent folks develop an identity in physics, every single person was like, I do physics differently. I do physics in this like non-normative way, and the many implications therein of, oh, I see myself doing physics differently than my peers, and that makes me feel like I'm a bad physicist, or I'm seeing my peers get rewarded for doing like what feels like infinitely less work, whereas I'm having to put in all this extra effort to perform in the same way that they are, even though we have equal understanding of physics. Um, and so that's really, really interesting. That's really, really cool. And we want to dig into that deeper. And the first thing that we need to do to dig into that deeper is to conduct a systematic literature review, right? We really wanted to know if there was any consistent themes from literature that we could draw upon. Are we starting from scratch? Or like, is there any information that we can use to inform our broader study design on looking at how neurodivergent folks learn and perform physics? Spoilers, no. We had to build that ourselves. But we also wanted to call out any gaps in the literature. We also wanted to see how neurodivergent folks, both demographically and in terms of using neurodiversity frameworks, how neurodivergent students are represented in the literature. How are we going to do that? Very good question. I'm glad you asked. We want to frame this work in terms of neurodiversity, critical disability theory, and feminist standpoint theory. And so, again, I already talked about neurodiversity. That's the celebration of the cognitive diversity of minds, right? Critical disability theory, we're taking the view that disability is a systemic thing. We're taking a very systems level approach towards disability, saying that and looking at disability as a societal, a socio-political, like almost imposition on a person, right? That there are we're taking the social model rather than the medical model. And in fact, we're actually taking a little bit step further and saying we're taking a diversity model of a disability, saying that while people experience disability as a societal thing, right? There's disability is not a like purely inherent thing in a person. Instead, disabling things make a person disabled, right? Disabling things in society. We're taking it one step further and saying, well, yes, right. disability is a societal thing, but it's also a interaction between a person's like inherent qualities, such as being neurodivergent, and environmental and societal factors, right? So we're taking that little extra piece of nuance. And then we're using feminist standpoint theory. And the reason why we're using feminist standpoint theory is that we're taking the perspective that people who are marginalized, uh, they are the creators of their own knowledge. They are the creators of the knowledge about themselves and their experiences. And so when we're looking at the literature review, we're not trying to look at how, as the example for many things that we had to exclude, right? We're not looking at how like parents of neurodivergent students feel about their children being neurodivergent, right? That was not a thing that we were particularly interested in. We wanted to look at how neurodivergent students experience being neurodivergent. And so how did we break down our literature review? We looked at dissertations and peer-reviewed journal articles. We also looked at conference articles, but that's sort of implicitly included in the peer-reviewed journal articles. We really wanted to look at neurodivergent STEM undergraduates, so things that articles that were about graduate students or K-12. While very, very important, that is quite frankly too much for one group to do in one study. And then the topics that we looked at was how neurodivergent students learn and perform STEM subjects. So the papers must discuss neurodivergent STEM learning or performance in some way. That being said, they did not have to like explicitly discuss that, right? There were multiple papers that like discussed disabled folks in general and included stuff about how neurodivergent folks learn and perform STEM subjects. We also included that. And then we took the standpoint of neurodivergent students. We weren't looking at how like professors feel about neurodivergent students, how parents feel about neurodivergent students. We were looking at how neurodivergent students feel about being neurodivergent and learning as neurodivergent students. Maybe my mouse will work. So what's the data look like? Thank God I have undergrads. They made the work that I do so much easier. We started out with 2,469 papers, individual data points. That's a lot. Would not recommend that. Would not wish that on my worst enemy. But fortunately, again, we have undergraduates, and they made what ostensibly we planned to be a 6-month project, whittled it down to about 3 months. I absolutely adore them. Well, I have them in my acknowledgments after this, but George and Mason are, if anyone wants to hire them, they're amazing. But whittled that down to 275. We then did a forward and backward search, whittled it down again using our inclusion-exclusion criteria, and we've arrived at 47 articles that are included in our full data corpus. So what disciplines are represented? As it turns out, so I'm a physics education researcher by trade, so I'm particularly happy that physics of the disciplines are leading the pack. Most of the papers looked at like college students broadly or STEM students broadly, whereas 4 looked at physics, 4 looked at mathematics, 3 looked at engineering, so on and so forth. Unfortunately, 2 of those physics papers are me. I wrote 2 of those physics papers, so physics is maybe doing a little less well than I had hoped. But as we can see, like in terms of disciplinary or discipline-based education research, very, very important that we do more neurodivergent research. Almost all discipline-based education research papers only had one paper represented in our data corpus. For the most part, we just looked at the articles looked at STEM students and college students broadly. What identities are represented? This slide is a little bit more pertinent to the paper, to the conference at hand. Most of the identities represented in our literature corpus, I've been referring to them as the big three. These are ADHD, autism, and dyslexia. In a lot of education research involving neurodivergent folks, these are the three that are going to be very, very well represented. I have many conjectures, namely that like autism and ADHD already tend to lead the pack in how in neurodivergent research broadly, mainly as the neurodivergent paradigm starts with autistic scholars talking about being autistic, and then branches out. Um, and then like autism, ADHD, and dyslexia tend to be very visible disabilities and neurodivergent identities in educational settings, right? But we did see some papers looking at traumatic brain injuries and OCD, bipolar disorder, executive function. Four looked at neurodiversity in general. Two of them were mine, unfortunately. So we still have a lot of work to do. There's also something that I do kind of want to call out a little bit here, which is this LD, that stands for learning disabilities. A majority of the neurodivergent identities were just learning disabilities broadly, which were generally undefined. We had to dig a bit deeper into the articles to figure out what exactly they were talking about. Largely, learning disabilities were just included in the neurodivergent identity breakdown. Just out of most neurodivergent identities may fall into learning disabilities, and most learning disabilities would fall into neurodivergent identities, right? But a lot of papers, all of these papers are post 2000. All of these papers that like looked at learning disabilities just that kind of said the people are learning disabled. I just left it at that. And didn't really talk about like the ways in which they are disabled in a learning environment, right? And that just kind of like rubbed me the wrong way as a neurodivergent person. Um, I while I think that the categories, the like extreme breakdown of categories is a bit rough sometimes. It is very useful in a research setting to talk about how people are disabled when you're talking about ways to incorporate them better into a classroom based on how they are disabled, you know? Um, but alas, there is a lot of work to do. So that's all well and good. That's our data corpus. That's our quantitative data. What's really, really interesting about this literature review is the results from our thematic analysis. So our thematic analysis, we broke down a bunch of common themes, and we found that there were three big themes that kept popping out. We organized them as sort of the like pillars of education, right? There's the educational structure, there's the social aspects of education, and there's the like cognitive aspects of education. But as we were going through, we're like, there's something missing. There's like there's all these like little extra bits and pieces that like kind of fit into our like educational structure or social aspects or cognitive aspects, but they're just different enough that there's something there. We realized that what they all had in common was a temporal aspect of the learning environment. And so we broke down very happily for me as a physicist, broke down our themes in terms of three spatial dimensions and one temporal dimension. And we found that while all of these extra little bits and pieces, they were all temporal. They also all were very reminiscent of a thing from queer theory titled queer time, right? And so queer time is the idea that like temporal structures are made in a normative way. And so like as a queer person, the chief example that I see used is like your first kiss in like a cis heteronormative environment happens in like middle school or high school, right? And then you go to prom and then it's real cute and blah blah blah. But like my experience as a queer person in rural Iowa, right? My first kiss didn't happen till like well in college, you know. I went to prom alone, but like with a group of friends, you know. And so I had a very different experience of the like life course that was expected of me, right? This is very similar. A lot of the themes that talked about the temporal aspects of doing class or doing learning, right, were queered in a way, and so we sort of made the leap that like, oh, these might be like some neuroqueer time aspects. And so I include an example down at the bottom, but like think about how we collectively engage in weekly class and homework cycles, right? You're expected to cover X amount of material in Y amount of time, or expect students to be focusing for 1 to 2 hour intervals in class. A lot of the times in the literature, this was not relevant, right? This was not the way that neurodivergent folks did learning and performance of classes. In fact, like the cyclical aspects of class were tiresome and ended up leading certain students to have their cycles break down because they felt it was almost like Sisyphean in ways. And so, just to show you a more visual description of our themes, right? Here are how we broke it down. We have our educational structure, so like people's sensory needs, the tedium of class, the requirements that a lot of neurodivergent folks wanted, methodology oriented teaching, the social aspects such as like missing class not being uncaring, just being a result of being too tired to do class, uh, or benefiting from more research-based settings, right? We say also in the cognition aspect, the like actual cognitive aspects of being neurodivergent, right? Being particularly prone to pattern recognition or having differences in symbol distinguishing, right? As like dyslexic and dyscalculic students, right? And then our neuroqueer time aspects, such as the Sisyphean work pattern, need for flexibility in deadlines and in class structures, needing the instruction itself to slow down, uh, and a consistent amount of procrastination due to uh, requirements of the working environment, the Sisyphean aspect of doing work, leading students to procrastinate just to recharge, right? So yeah, I've reached my time. So I want to thank all y'all for being here. And this work has been funded by the NSF. And again, I'm a postdoc at the University of Connecticut. This is my advisor. This is Dr. Aaron Scanlon. And then these are my two advisors, Mason and not advisors, my two undergrads, Mason and George. And these are my cats, Houseplant and Lovelace. They surprisingly have not bothered me during this talk. So, but thank y'all.
Thank you, Liam, for your presentation. It was a lot of wonderful information there. As a neurodivergent queer person myself, especially with all the ABCs, including bipolar disorder, which I got legitimately from my own father.
Hell yeah.
Go,
we love heirlooms.
yes, and I passed them on to my daughter, so she has all of hers as well. I do love that you are looking at all the different needs inside the classroom and everything. So I have just a couple questions trying to look through here.
Gladly.
So first, what are some of the most common assumptions that you found that's built into teaching? And then also, because being diagnosed is a privilege that
Yes.
that not everybody has, including with learning disabilities sometimes, especially with learning disabilities, how do you recommend overcoming that?
Yes. So number one assumption that I see, this is just a problem that I have with education research in general, but specifically for disability in education, is this assumption that like students themselves are inherently lazy or inherently trying to cheat or inherently like this very like Calvinist perspective of students are predestined to be fighting against you, which like in my experience in education is not true. Most of the time students are much more willing to engage with you if you're like, no, I'm on your side, we're all working on this together, right? And so this is just sort of like reinforced and like turned to the nth degree for neurodivergent students. This is why you see down in like the sociality and asociality aspects, right? Cheating as a last resort or missing class not being like uncaring, right? This arise out of students appear in the literature to keep being like, no, I just need to sometimes take a rest and recharge break, and I just can't go to class because I can't drag myself out of bed because of all the other things that are going on in life or all the other things that are going on in class, right? Um, and then the cheating as last resort keeps kind of popping up in the literature of students being like, I know that I'm cheating. I know that I'm going and talking to my cohort, my peers, and being like, "Hi, what did you get for number five?" Right? Or going on and using like Chegg or other like online resources, and they're doing it not out of like every single person that mentions this in the literature, and also from the research that we're doing now, every single person that mentions it is like, no, I hate the fact that I'm doing this. I feel so guilty. But it's the only way that I can keep my head above water in this class. So that's like the biggest assumption, is that like students are inherently like bad, and they're not. They're doing things out of like survival reasons. Um, and then in terms of the diagnosis as a privilege, yes, 100%. Uh, the way that I see, so I will say a lot of literature is doing very well in this, where they're just asking students like, hey, do you identify as neurodivergent? If you're comfortable sharing, let me know what specific neurodivergent identity you identify as, right? Uh, and they're not checking or anything like that. Um, and I do think that there's some element of in asking that question without like the asterisk of there's no wrong way to identify. Uh, you do end up kind of self-screening certain students who don't have the diagnosis, and they have that sort of imposter syndrome about it. And so I think the way to fix that is by putting that asterisk in all my recruitment materials. There's a little parentheses being like, it can be self peer reviewed, like there is no wrong way to identify. Um, and then what was the other way I see folks do it is, which I think is rubs me the wrong way, but there's a couple of papers that are like, I'm going to administer this test to you and I'll diagnose you, which is wild. I don't have that legal capability. I may be a doctor, but I'm not that kind of doctor. So, like, that's just a little bit wild. I don't recommend doing that. But I see that a bunch in the literature, especially dyslexic literature. But the main way that I see jumping over that hurdle is being very upfront and being like, there is no wrong way to answer this question. Um, and yeah, that's how I'll answer that question.
Okay, thank you very much. I just have one more question. And that now I need to go through and remember where I was. Oh, how do you feel that institutions can begin creating more inclusive practices without relying just on those individual accommodations alone? Like I mentioned in the chat, going through and teaching people how to read textbooks or journal
Yes.
articles, because as a neurodivergent autistic person, we're taught to read at an early age, but not necessarily reading for school, and then we end up reading the
Yeah.
entire thing.
No, 100%. I remember going, like, being on the bus and just being like, well, this is how I'll entertain myself, and reading the entire, like, science textbook, right? Obtaining no information, just being like, yes, I'm going to read this for my special interest purposes. But so yes, I agree, especially that there needs to be some element of like making the hidden curriculum not hidden as a like broad classroom management thing, or broad like classroom pedagogical thing, of being like, here's how you read the textbook, here's how you read a journal article. I think that that will help broadly everybody, not just neurodivergent folks. And then the other like main thing is that, like, while you're not relying on individual accommodations, making the class very individual, it seems to be the way that like the trend is going. And so what I mean by that is uh having a very like applying the universal design for learning uh uh what sort of tenets to your class, making it so like all your lecture slides are freely available, making it so like your materials are usable by screen readers, things like that, right? But then also making it clear at the beginning of class to be like, hey, I want to make this learning experience as accessible and as inclusive to you, the student, as possible. If there's anything I can do, let me know. And of course, that kind of puts the burden on the student, but really being attentive and seeing like when students are uh, uh, struggling a bit in class, to be like, hey, I see that this is not working for you. Do you want to try this other thing? And being proactive in that, or proactive is the wrong word, reactive in that regard, but making sure that you are taking the steps to go, I am a open space to help you as a disabled student achieve XYZ in this class, you know?
I do
Does that
want to
make sense?
interrupt because yes, it
Okay.
is wonderful. That does also go to Sarah Rifle's questions about what can we do, what can we ask, and things like that, where we often assume these things. And we are running a little bit out of time, but I do want to thank you again for your presentation. It was wonderful. I am
Thank you.
including your email right now in the chat if anybody wants to go through and contact Leon McDermott himself. And I want to
Please
thank
do.
you again.
Thank you.